To leaders' questions, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, last February the Minister for the Environment, Alan Kelly, confirmed that the Government is proposing a statutory framework which will introduce a rent certainty for up to 4 years. And all throughout the year, month by month, Minister Kelly is quoted as saying he's going to bring an end to rent instability. He's going to bring rent certainty, he's going to bring proposals before Cabinet, he's going to tackle the spiralling rents. It's now his #1 priority. And he said he's expecting legislation by the end of the year. In June we read that he wants to tie rent increases to inflation, to bring in temporary rent controls to assist families who are under huge pressures and who are being made homeless on a month-by-month basis. In September we get leaks and headlines from Fine Gael sources, senior Cabinet ministers saying it will not happen, that they're against Minister Kelly's plan. Worryingly, in response, in a kind of Jose Marino type response, he goes into third person and he attacks the cowards, the anonymous cowards that are briefing against him. He's talking about his colleagues, Fine Gael senior ministers he's talking about. But meanwhile, Taoiseach, as all this infighting goes on, we read all the headlines, AK-47 versus Buddha, and the former Minister of Finance who's nodding silently and sagely, and so on like that. Meanwhile, the numbers, 1,500 children in emergency accommodation, threshold saying that the numbers of families will rise who are homeless will go from 700 to 1,000 by Christmas. And the indecision is creating further instability in the rental market, with people shoving up the rents to get in ahead of whatever proposals are going to emerge from Cabinet. NESC is saying that well-designed rent certainty proposals can bring about a lot of stability to the market,
please. Thank you.
and can bring about a degree of certainty, and is somewhat concerned by some of the leaks from the Fine Gael side in relation to the dissing on the whole rent certainty, rent control agenda. And fundamentally the question is, Taoiseach, going back to the commitment of last February, that we would see legislation by the end of the year. The budget has passed but nothing proposed. Will we see legislation shortly that will bring about the rent certainty that the Minister has staked his reputation on and has said is something that he regards as his #1 priority and something he wants to introduce? Or is the story in today's Irish Independent that his plans are dead in the water?
Well, we've referred to this on a number of occasions here in the recent past. There are a whole number of issues that need to be dealt with in respect of the housing situation generally, both in respect of homelessness, either rough sleepers or those who do not have a place to stay because they're homeless or they're being put out of accommodation that they've got. A great deal of work has gone on in respect of most of that, and what I want to say to you is that the Minister for Finance and the Minister for the Environment had a very good meeting yesterday. They're discussing a number of issues, Deputy Martin, in respect to the short term that need to be attended to, and in the longer term. As I said on many occasions, the real problem here is the lack of supply of housing, and government are looking at a range of options there that can't take place overnight to provide the many houses that are needed. Suffice it to say that yesterday we had discussions which were very progressive, I have to say, in respect of modular housing, the numbers of voids that have been returned to habitable accommodation, the targets set for the social housing objectives of the local authorities, the fact that the ministers called them all in and told them to get on with that, and the renovations that are taking place throughout Dublin in particular. I expect that the progress made in respect of rough sleepers in particular is one that will be able to be met in the case of a bad winter. 130 beds opened extra this year, further 130 to be opened now, and the money in place to deal with that. So I expect that the people who are working in respect of the rough sleeping element of the population that is in Dublin in particular can be dealt with. I expect that and hope that the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Finance can conclude on the discussions that they're having about what needs to be done in the short term and what needs to be put in place for the medium, longer term to deal with the supply of housing. I hope they can conclude that this week, Deputy Martin.
Taoiseach, you hope they can conclude it? Like, we've had a budget. It's chaotic what's going on. absolute chaotic in terms of two ministers. They had a good meeting yesterday. We're all supposed to breathe a sigh of relief. You know, after all the kind of leaks and counter-leaks and the antagonism of the last 2 months on this question. It's going back to last February, and I asked you a simple question. Minister Kelly said there would be legislation last September on this issue. He said he would link rent controls rent increases to the CPI index, to inflation. We're almost at the anniversary of the death of Jonathan Corrie 12 months ago, Taoiseach, when this Dáil was appalled at that development and at the whole issue around homelessness. And all that has happened over the last 12 months has got progressively worse. And any TD who's in a clinic with young families coming in who have absolutely no certainty of where they're going to be housed next week, it's a shocking indictment of your leadership, Taoiseach, and of the government's lack of cohesion, of any focus or sense of purpose, or any policy in relation to homelessness. All we get is the Minister for the Environment calling Fine Gael a load of cowards.
Sorry.
And they calling him Calamity Kelly.
Question, please.
That's what we're getting in the media on a week-by-week basis. Yet families are coming to us saying, can you do something for us? I'm 3 nights in a hotel this week, and I'm 3 nights in self-catering apartments after that, and the welfare officer is saying I have only €700 to pay out. It's that bad, Taoiseach. And the rents are increasing and have been spiralling out of control, which basically means that families are being evicted as we speak.
Thank you.
And as the government continues with the pseudo-warfare going on through the media, in the absence of any coherence or any single-minded sort of purposeful policy initiative. The budget was silent. Both ministers, Noonan and Powell, were silent on this issue for an entire budgetary speech. And one of the most basic obligations of a state, Taoiseach, is to put a roof over people's heads. Will there be legislation, Taoiseach, or not before the end of this Dáil session?
Thank you.
And can you confirm whether the plan to link rent increases to inflation is now dead in the water? Is that going to happen, or is it not?
Taoiseach, thank you.
I said to you that I hope that the discussions between the Minister for Finance and the Minister for the Environment can be concluded satisfactorily this week. They will deal with a number of matters in the shorter term. And obviously you have to put in place arrangements to deal with the provision and the supply of housing for the medium to longer term. The Minister did change the regulations, as you're aware, in respect of the HAP programme, which I think allows for an increase in rent to be made available by subsistence from the Department of Social Protection, which gives certainty of tenancy to that category that are under serious pressure here. And in respect of the modular housing, which is already now underway with a start for sites that have been identified here in Dublin. The real problem, I take your point, I had many examples of people who are under serious pressure in terms of rent being increased by landlords. They're not all pressurising people, because there's a humanity there too in many cases that I'm aware of. But clearly the situation is not the way we want it to be. There was a total collapse of the housing sector here from 100,000, 90,000 units down to less than 8. Obviously, there are issues that need to be addressed in the immediate term in respect of landlords, in respect of the rent situation, and the ministers are talking about that. And I hope they can conclude those discussions this week. Clearly, the situation insofar as the supply of housing, which deals with all of this, is critical, and it's not possible to deal with it, just overnight. It may well be that legislation will be required, and if it is required, it will be introduced.
Thank you.
It will be introduced. I'd make the point, Deputy Martin, that on the other end of the scale, you're having announcement after announcement about job investment and investment in the country here, and this is obviously creating pressure in other areas in respect of accommodation, both commercial and residential. That doesn't solve the problem of the person under pressure this evening, but the changes made by the Minister already in respect of the short term are beneficial, they're helpful, they're not the answer, but we hope that we can conclude those discussions this week.
Thank you. Deputy Doherty on behalf of Sinn Féin.